Law number 17, the law of priorities. The law of priorities says that leaders understand that activity is not necessarily accomplishment. So let's talk about that for a moment. Activity is not necessarily accomplishment. Some of these laws I do better on than others, and there are some laws that I excel more than others. I want to just say that probably of the 21 laws, this is my best law. I really do understand the law of priorities. And so let me give you a little bit of background. I'm working on a business degree in Indiana back in 1971, 72 in college. And I read in a textbook about the Pareto principle. A guy named Alfredo Pareto. It was the first time that I ever was introduced to what is known sometimes as the 80-20 principle. The first time that I've ever was introduced to it, and basically Pareto taught in that one paragraph in that book about priorities. And I remember reading that paragraph and saying to myself, this is very important to me. I need to learn priorities the way Pareto taught them. And so I became a student of Pareto. I became a student of priorities. And that was, my goodness, that was well over 30 years ago. And I can tell you that when people look at what little things that I've been able to accomplish, and they come and say, how can you accomplish so much? I can always tell them with great integrity, this law right here, the law of priorities, I have worked on and I have excelled in. So let's look at your notes, because this is a terrific law to teach. I've already got a diagram for you, so let's just look at the diagram for a second. On the left-hand column is priorities. And by the way, since I'm doing some teaching on this, I want you to put a slice there, and I want you to also put the word people. Because I'm going to teach you priorities, but I'm also going to teach you how to prioritize your people in about 5 minutes. So, but for now, the left-hand column is priorities, and the right-hand column is production, and it pretty well explains itself. Here's what Pareto says. Pareto says that if you have 10 things to do, and you prioritize those 10 things correctly, if you only do 2 of them, but you do the top 2, you're going to get an 80% return on everything you need in your life. It's very obvious. You do 2 things, you go to the production side, 80% return. That's huge. Pareto goes on and says, let's say instead of doing the top 2 things, you do the bottom 8. You ignore the top 2. The most important things you ignore, and you do the bottom 8. Here's what Pareto says. If you do the bottom 8, if you go to the production side, you can see you're only going to have a 20% return. That's why it's sometimes called the 80-20 principle or the 20-80 principle. It's really talking about how to prioritize your life. And Pareto says, if you prioritize your life correctly, if you do just the 2 things out of 10 that you need to do, the most important 2, 80% of everything you want in your business, I can tell you this works in your family. If you prioritize your family time right, 80% of everything you need in your family, it's going to happen if you understand how to work the top 20%. What I have found is most people don't understand the 20-80 principle, and so therefore they don't put the time, energy, and effort in the top 20%, so therefore they don't get the return. Now, this is a great principle, but there are 3 questions, priority questions, that you need to ask yourself, that I need to ask myself, that helps me to establish this top 20%. Question number 1, requirement. I've got to ask myself, what is required of me? In other words, I've got to look at my job. I've got to look at my company, my organization, the one that I work for. There are certain job descriptions. There are certain requirements of the job. And I've got to basically say, okay, what do I have to do? Because whatever I have to do, I have to do it. If I don't do those, I'm fired. So it's got to be a priority. True? So I've got to ask what's required of me. The second word is return. I've got to look at all the things I do, and I have to ask myself this question, what gives me the greatest return? The third word is reward. I have to ask myself the question, what gives me the greatest reward? Now, those 3 questions I have found to be huge in understanding the 20-80 principle. But Alfredo Pareto says that if you prioritize your life correctly and you do the top 20%, you get an 80% return. And on that top 20%, I have to have those 3 R's. What's required of me, what gives me the highest return, and what gives me the greatest reward. See, I've got to ask the requirement question, because if I don't do that, well, then I'm out of a job. I've got to ask the return question, because if I don't do that well, I'm not going to produce. And I've got to ask the reward job, because if I don't like what I'm doing and I continually do it, it's only a matter of time till I'll quit. Requirement, return, reward. Let me illustrate it. I only have 4 things that I have to do. In fact, when I tell people that I only have 4 priorities, they look at me and they just kind of look at me and say, what do you mean you only do 4 things? What I mean is I only do 4 things. They say, well, no, I mean, don't you do other things? No, read my lips. Now, the reason I only do 4 things is a lot of reasons. One is I understand priorities. Number 2 is I'm kind of worthless in most things in life. It's just a gift, so it's not yours, so don't worry about it. Okay. But worthless I am. But the 4 things I do very well. And my whole team understands this. And they do everything around me so that I can stay focused on these 4 areas, because these 4 areas bring a huge return to me and to my companies that I have. So let me give you the 4 things. I'm only giving you these 4, not because these are going to be your 4, because they're not going to be. But you're going to have to go through the process, which literally took me months to go through, until you can settle in what your strengths are, what you need to be spending your time with. My 4 priorities, very simple. Number 1 is leadership. I lead well, so I spend a lot of time leading. It's a gift, and I know it. Number 2 is communication. I do it almost every day. I speak places, I lecture, I teach. I do a lot of communication. Why? Because it's a strength. The 3rd is create or /write. I spend a lot of time creative thinking. I spend a lot of time in writing. Again, why? Because it's a strength of mine. I love to write books so that I can add value to people that I'll probably never meet. And the 4th area is in networking or relationships. Now, those are the 4 things I do. I either lead, communicate, create, or relate with other people. Those are the 4 things. I don't do anything else. You say, John, why don't you do anything else? Because I'm not any good at anything else. You've got to play to your strengths, not to your weaknesses. It's very important for you to understand. Listen to me carefully. People don't pay for average. They haven't paid for average in your life. They're not going to pay for average in my life. People don't pay for average. So quit trying to be average. Find out what you do well. Stay to your strengths, because that's the ace. That's what's going to bring you home. Now, these 4 areas, these are the 4 areas I stay in. I don't do anything else. Now, I have to have a lot of things done, so I have players around me that they complete me, and they do things for me that are huge on the team that are vitally important. Now, I'm not saying these are the only 4 important things. I'm just saying, for me, these are the 4 things that I do, and these are my 4 top priorities. These give me the greatest return. These give me the greatest reward. You see, what Pareto is teaching you and me are the following lessons. He's teaching us, first of all, it's not how hard you work, it's how smart you work. He's teaching us that it's not how much time you put in the job, it's how you prioritize the job to be effective in it. He's teaching us things such as organize or agonize. In other words, get your act together and get organized, or you're going to always be behind the 8 ball and you're going to be agonizing because you're trying to always catch up. He's saying things such as choose or lose. Either you choose your priorities or you'll lose your priorities to somebody else that will choose them for you. The question is not will your calendar be full. The question is who will fill your calendar. He's saying things like evaluate or stalemate. Evaluate your priorities on a consistent basis, or if you don't, you're going to plateau, you're going to stalemate before long. Now, before I close this incredible law of priorities, let's go back to the diagram one more time. I want you to, instead of looking at priorities on the left-hand column, I want you to look at people. I wish I had 30 minutes to teach this part of the lesson. I'll try to do it in 30 seconds. If you have 10 people in your organization, or let's say you have 100 and each number represents 10, here's what Pareto says. If you have 100 people in your organization, if you prioritize them according to effectiveness in your company, 20 of those 100 people would be giving you 80% return on everything you need in your organization. And the other 80 would be giving you a 20% return. And what Pareto would be saying to you and me as leaders is, you better prioritize your people. And what he would be saying is, once you prioritize them according to effectiveness, here's what Pareto would say is, he would say, spend 80% of your time with the top 20% of your people, because that's where the return is. Let me tell you what our biggest mistake is as leaders. I see it happening all the time. Instead of spending 80% of our time with our top 20%, do you know who we spend 80% of our time with? The bottom 20%. Because they've got questions and they want help and they've got an owie and oh, it's tough. We say, well, the top 20%, they don't need my time. The bottom 20%, they need your time. Listen. You've got to decide whether you're going to be a counselor or an equipper. If you're a counselor, you're going to work with the bottom 20%. If you're an equipper, you're going to work with the top 20%. If you're a counselor, you're going to work on the weaknesses of people. If you're an equipper, you're going to work on the strengths of people. And I'll discuss that in another law coming up. Well, the law of priorities is absolutely huge. Basically, Pareto says, get your act together. Prioritize your life, prioritize your people, prioritize your time, and give 80% of the time to the top 20%, and you'll get a huge return.